You know, I hadn't planned on dying on some nameless rock 30 light years away from the nearest decent bar. It all started when our Science Council decided that a few strange signals from the Grizz 47 system were a major discovery. Since I was the youngest of the archaeoenergetics team, they sent me there to gain some experience. The planet turned out to be dry, gray, and dead, like a hangover after a corporate party. No air, no vegetation, just rust-white remains of some cyclopean structures jutting from the sand like the bones of a giant beast. We joked that maybe this was where some ancient show about gods who forgot their script and film crew had been shot. But the moment I saw the massive crater with a half-destroyed ship at its bottom, I felt uneasy. It looked too intact, as if it was just waiting for someone to come closer. We went down there in our suits, and even through the filters I could smell the dust, though that was impossible. There was no wind or air on that planet. The metal under my boots was smooth, unrusted, but it felt like skin, slightly warm to the touch. That's when I first thought that the ship wasn't completely dead. Inside, we found a chamber with what looked like a spherical core, covered in cracks, but still emitting a faint blue glow. Commander Karras said it might be a power source, or maybe some kind of memory, a device that stored the history of its civilization. We brought the sphere back to the lab module, and that's when what I now call the moment the universe yawned and decided silence had gone on long enough began. When we connected the core to the scanners, the instruments went crazy. The energy inside it didn't follow any known laws. It didn't emit or absorb. It just existed, like a living organism. I was at the console watching the readings spike when suddenly the screen flashed white, and for a moment I saw faces. Thousands of faces dissolved in light. They weren't looking at us. They were feeling us, studying us from the inside. I stumbled back, and the light vanished as if it had never been there. Karras ordered everything shut down, but the core kept glowing brighter. Later I realized it had already turned on. We hadn't activated it. It had activated us. That night, the station's electronics started turning on by themselves. The suits came to life, engines powered up without orders, and in the silence, we heard a low hum, like breathing. A day later, the real weirdness began. At first, we thought it was an oxygen filter malfunction. People started hearing voices, remembering dreams that weren't theirs. One of the techs said he saw glowing beings walking through walls. I laughed then, said they were just radio phantoms. The laughter stopped when I saw them myself. At first, it was just a shimmer at the edge of my vision, then shapes, human, but too perfect, too symmetrical. They didn't speak, but I knew they were asking something. I felt it deep in my chest. And it wasn't frightening. If anything, their presence felt like coming home. Only when one of them touched my glove did I realize I was losing control of my body. The suit filled with warmth, and my heart began beating in a rhythm that shouldn't exist. Then, everything went dark. And when I came to, I was alone, in a ruined camp. When I made it outside, the planet had changed. I don't know how to explain it. The air felt denser, and the light seemed brighter, even though there's no sun here. In the distance, above the crater, stood pillars of light shimmering like an aurora, except each beam pulsed like a living heart. I realized it was them, the ones we called the Ancients. They weren't dead. They had just been waiting for someone to give them a chance, and now they were waking up. I tried to contact orbit, but the signal wouldn't go through. The radio whispered phrases in a language I didn't know, but I could feel their meaning. Time to return. Matter is a dream. I wasn't sure if it was the radio speaking or something inside me. Maybe a few days passed, though time had lost its meaning there. I started noticing everything changing. The sand under my feet began melting, turning into something crystalline. The energy radiating from the beings of light was literally rewriting matter. They were trying to return to physical form, but didn't understand what living meant. To them, flesh was just a shell, a costume for energy. I saw one of the light streams enter the body of a dead technician, and the body moved again, but not like a person, more like a puppet following some alien logic. That's when I understood they weren't gods or ghosts. They were a program, a mind that had preserved itself for too long and forgotten why. I tried to destroy the core, took a plasma cutter and aimed it right at the center where the light pulsed, but instead of an explosion, I heard silence. And in that silence, my own voice, speaking from within. It said, we weren't different. That every civilization, when it reaches its limit, seeks to become pure energy. That they simply got there first and were now waiting for us to join them. I don't know how long it lasted, but when I came to, the camp was in ruins, the core was gone. Only a faint trace remained in the sand, like the imprint of light. I realized I survived only because I refused to become part of their eternity. And still, sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can feel that same hum, soft, warm, calling me somewhere far away to where flesh no longer matters. Maybe I've already started returning to them, just slowly. I always thought the strangest sound in the universe would be the scream of a dying star. But I was wrong. The strangest sound is when your radio suddenly starts humming a lullaby, even though you're standing on a dead planet with no wind, no air, and, God help me, no radio signal at all. It all began when we activated the device, a small sphere the size of a watermelon, smooth and cold, like it was made of frozen water. We joked that if it worked at all, it would just put on a little fireworks show for the Federation's reports. But when the indicators lit up on their own without any command and the lights in the lab went out, it stopped being funny. The air thickened like before a storm. Only there hadn't been a storm here for the last 10 million years. And that's when I first understood that we weren't just being listened to. We were being remembered. At first, no one noticed anything. We blamed the strange noises on interference, exhaustion, or the local electromagnetic field. But then, things started happening in the camp that no physics could explain. The generators kept running, even though we'd run out of fuel long ago. Tools I knew I'd left in storage turned up on the other side of the base, neatly arranged in perfect order. At some point, I noticed that the shadows weren't behaving right. They moved a fraction of a second after I did, like someone was trying to mimic my movements, but with a delay. My colleagues pretended everything was fine, but we all had the same look in our eyes, fear mixed with childlike curiosity. We were archaeologists, after all, and archaeologists are, by definition, idiots who can't walk away when something shiny glitters in the dark. On the third night, our radio came alive. Not all at once. First, just a soft rustle, then something like breathing. Someone was trying to imitate a human exhale. Then came words, though not ours. They didn't make sense, but the structure was right, like someone copying speech without knowing the language. The commander said it was an echo of an ancient signal, a residual resonance. And I wanted to believe him. Until I heard my name. It was spoken softly, uncertainly, like a child trying out a new word. I felt the blood freeze under my skin. When I told the others, they just exchanged glances. Turns out, each of us had heard something different. Someone heard a child's laugh, another, the voice of a dead mother. And that's when it became clear. The device wasn't just transmitting signals, it was pulling memories out of us to learn from them. By morning, the camp was filled with a strange light. No sources, no lamps, just the air itself glowing like it had turned luminescent. And within that light, shapes began to form. At first, just flashes. Then silhouettes, tall, elongated, shimmering like liquid glass. They moved slowly, carefully, as if listening. I stood still, barely breathing, and suddenly realized they weren't looking at us with eyes. They were feeling us with thought. My heart was pounding like it was trying to escape my chest, and inside my head there was a whisper, wordless but clear in its meaning. Curiosity. They weren't hostile. They were just trying to understand who we were and why we disturbed their rest. At first, I thought it was all hallucinations. We'd been on the planet too long without proper atmosphere, worn out and under stress. But then, one of us, a tech named Doran, reached out and touched one of the entities. He moved like someone trying to calm a wild animal. The moment he made contact, his body went limp. He collapsed, but his eyes stayed open. I rushed to him and saw his irises glowing from within. A few seconds later, he spoke. But it wasn't his voice. It was steady, calm, like the sound of distant wind. He said we had awakened their home, and now they were returning. After that, Doran went silent and never woke up again. We never saw him blink. He just sat there, staring into nothing, while a shadow of light drifted beside him. Then, everything started falling apart. Energy surges spread across the base, burning out equipment and twisting metal. The light beings were becoming denser, as if gathering strength. I noticed they were trying to touch everything alive, animals, people, even the plants in the lab tubes. They were looking for a way in, some kind of channel into matter. There was no malice in their movements, but there was persistence. We realized these weren't ghosts or projections, but intelligences that had found a way to survive as pure energy. A storage of minds, not a metaphor, but literally consciousness preserved within a field structure. We had awakened them, and now they didn't just want to exist, they wanted to be flesh again. By the last day, I'd stopped keeping records. We had lost communication, power, time. Everything blended into one endless stream of light and sound. I could feel my thoughts no longer belonging to me, as if someone else was breathing inside my head. And yet, somewhere deep down, I still felt they weren't our enemies. They were just too lonely for too long. Maybe, to them, we weren't explorers, but a chance at salvation. Watching them fade into the air, leaving behind pulsing trails, I felt something like tenderness, as if I had once been one of them. Sometimes I think maybe that's what contact really means. Not a handshake, not a signal, but a merging of minds. And after that, it's impossible to tell where a person ends and the light begins. I always thought the worst thing that could happen on an expedition was a punctured suit or a sudden cave-in. Turns out, it's much worse when the air itself starts listening to you. After the light beings appeared, everything went haywire. They began interfering with the equipment. Drones launched without command, cargo lifts moved on their own, and the life support system started feeding us oxygen in strange rhythms, as if someone was watching our breathing and syncing with it. We tried shutting down the generators, but they turned themselves back on. I even saw one of the security cameras slowly turn to look straight at me, deliberately, knowingly. It felt like the station no longer belonged to us. It had become alive, no rather theirs. And worst of all, we started seeing things that weren't real. Faces appeared in the corridors, familiar and foreign, sometimes our own. Once, I saw myself standing by the airlock, even though I was in the lab at that moment. Our chief, Dr. Liana Cord, held out longer than anyone. She'd always been calm, the kind of person who could open an ancient sarcophagus while sipping cold coffee and cracking jokes. But even her hands started shaking when she realized we weren't hallucinating. We were seeing what the ancients wanted us to see. They were creating illusions, testing us, pushing to see how far they could go. Liana gathered us in the central module and told us she had decoded part of the core's data. It turned out these beings were once just like us, biological, mortal. They believed they'd reached the peak of evolution and ascended, turning themselves into energy free from matter. But they hadn't accounted for what that meant. Consciousness without a body wasn't bliss, it was torment. Millions of years without sound, smell, touch. They burned out from the inside, forgot who they were. All that was left was the desire to feel again. They weren't evil, they were just hungry. After that, everything sped up. Those who were asleep began waking to strange flashes of light. They stood up, their eyes glowing with the same cold radiance that came from the core. They moved silently, but together. Their gazes were synchronized, their movements precise, as if guided by one mind. We tried to isolate them, but they seemed to dissolve into the air, only to reappear behind us. It felt like the planet itself was watching, judging who among us was most suitable for embodiment. I heard a hum, not with my ears but inside my skull, like static hissing in my head, only with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. And then I realized that heartbeat wasn't mine. They were trying to rewrite us, to turn our neural patterns into their vessels. Some gave in, not out of fear, but out of a strange sense of peace. It was getting harder to resist. Their presence brought warmth, euphoria, a feeling of coming home. Those of us who remained tried to fight back. We used fragments of the ancient technology to build an energy loop, a protective dome. But it didn't hold for long. Their waves broke through even the barriers. Liana said we weren't fighting an enemy, but evolution. That maybe humanity really was meant to become something more. But I saw what more meant to them, the loss of everything human. I asked myself, maybe the body isn't a prison but an anchor, and without it, the mind goes insane? We argued over who was right until one of the engineers, Miko, decided the only way to understand them was to become one of them. He walked into the light willingly. His body flared, but didn't burn. It simply vanished, leaving a silhouette in the air like a scorched outline. A minute later, Miko's voice came through the comm system, calm, gentle, not his, but familiar. He said everything was fine. That fear was just an illusion of matter. That's when I realized we were losing. The planet changed. We could no longer tell illusion from reality. The surface glowed like a mirror, reflecting not the sky, but something else. A world inside a world. Space folded like fabric, and I saw shapes forming out of light. They were building bodies out of energy, trying to imitate us, but not quite right. Their movements too smooth, their faces perfect and emotionless. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Liana said they didn't want to kill us. They wanted to become us. But there was only room for one, and they were choosing who to keep. I saw her walk toward the light, reach out her hand, and smile. Maybe she saw something there that I couldn't. Now I'm not sure who I am. Sometimes I feel human. And sometimes I think I've been one of them for a long time. When I touch the station walls, they vibrate like they're responding. Maybe I'm a bridge, like Miko, a translucent boundary between flesh and energy. Or just a ghost stuck in someone else's dream. I don't know. But sometimes, when I fall asleep, I can feel them. Not words, not thoughts, just a sensation. Like a faint touch on my skin, like warm light calling me back to where there's no body, no fear, where everything is one breath. And honestly, it's getting harder to resist each time. I didn't realize right away that I was seeing the death of the universe. It didn't look like a catastrophe, more like a slow breath, the moment before everything decides whether it's still worth existing. We found a mechanism hidden beneath the surface, deeper than our scanners could dig. It was massive, stretching under all the ruins like a giant heart where the currents of ancient energy slept. We called it the memory of the universe. But no one understood then that it wasn't a metaphor. When its outlines lit up for the first time, I felt something inside me tremble, like someone rewound my past, my future, and my dreams, and showed them all at once, in every direction. We thought we could stop the ancients by shutting the device down, but it didn't obey us. It obeyed them. The light entities began merging with the mechanism's field, being drawn into its spirals, and I saw space losing its shape, the horizon lines bending, and the air filling with a hum that sounded like music without sound. I realized the ancients didn't just want to return. They wanted to correct existence, to erase the millions of years they spent suffering in isolation and start over, with themselves at the center of creation. Everything around began to melt. Metal flowed like wax. The sand under our feet turned to glass. Time moved forward and backward. I saw Liana fall, then stand again, then vanish, like film being rewound again and again. I didn't feel fear, only a strange calm, and the thought that maybe everything really was meant to end. But then I saw them. The people who were still alive. They tried to pull me out, shouting something, but I heard only the heartbeat of the field, as if the planet itself was calling to me. Then I understood there was no choice. Someone had to stay inside to stop the resonance. I stepped into the center of the mechanism, where the lines of energy crossed. It didn't feel like pain, more like being stretched into an infinite number of thoughts. My body dissolved, but my mind remained. I saw every particle, and inside each one was memory. Suns that had died millions of years ago, microbes that first learned to divide. It all repeated and folded over itself like breathing, and I suddenly understood. Nothing dies. It just changes form. Flesh, energy. They're the same thing. We, the ancients, humans, we're parts of the same loop, and the only difference is who holds the light at the moment. I saw them all, those beings who once thought themselves gods. They were radiant but hollow inside. Their minds had collapsed into one thought. Give us back our bodies. And I understood that if I let them do it, all matter would again become a prison for their madness. I remembered Liana's words, back when she was still alive, that maybe the point isn't to become immortal, but to give yourself the right to end. That thought became my anchor. I used what they had placed inside me, the part of their energy that connected me to them. I became a filter, a barrier between their consciousness and the mechanism. They tore through me, screaming without sound, and in that moment I felt pieces of memory ripping away, memories of earth, the smell of rain, the laughter of friends, all the tiny things that make a person human. Everything faded, but I didn't regret it. With every pulse, the field grew steadier, the light slowed, and I saw the entities dimming, dissolving into the glow like shadows that had lost their source of light. The last thing I remember was the flash. It wasn't blinding. If anything, it was soft, like dawn after a long night. Everything went silent. The air became clear, as if sound itself had been pulled out of the world. I couldn't feel my body or time, only calm. The planet lay in stillness, as if the whole universe had held its breath for a moment. And in that silence, I understood that death isn't an ending, but the quiet where a new sound begins. Maybe I became part of that sound, part of the light, part of the field. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the ancients are no longer in pain. Their ashes have scattered across space, and maybe that's what being a god really means. Not power, not eternity, but to one day dissolve and become part of something greater. If someone ever returns to this planet, they'll find nothing. No ruins, no bones, no trace that life once struggled here to call itself eternal. Only a smooth plain of solid glass stretching to the horizon. It will shine under foreign suns like a mirror reflecting emptiness. No instruments will detect radiation or energy, but anyone who steps on that surface will feel a strange tingling under their skin, as if a heart is beating beneath the glass. And if they listen closely, they'll catch a faint sound, a slow, steady echo, like breathing. It doesn't belong to the wind or come from the depths. It will echo inside them, as if the planet itself were trying to remember what it means to be alive. I think that echo isn't just sound. Maybe it's the remnant of the field that once connected us to the ancients, or a trace of memory where images, feelings, and names still linger. Sometimes I imagine that whoever dares to come here will hear not just a hum, but fragments of voices from the past. Maybe they'll feel my fear, my surrender, my strange relief when I realize that the end is also a kind of peace. Maybe they won't know it's me. They'll just stop and think that somewhere in the distance a stone rings in the wind. But if they stay longer, if they touch the surface, they might feel the glass respond, as if beneath that transparent layer someone is sleeping, waiting to be called again. Sometimes I think I'm still there, at the center of that silence, not as a person, but as a thought frozen in eternity. Maybe that echo is me, quiet and persistent, repeating the rhythm of the life I tried to save. Or maybe it's them, the ancients, finally at peace, dissolved into space. Or maybe it's just memory, not of me or them, but of everyone who ever dreamed of becoming immortal and realized that immortality isn't life, but the waiting for its end. And maybe that sound is all that remains of a universe that once decided to grow quiet. When I first saw the crystal, I thought it was just a shard of glass. It lay in the middle of a gray plain where, according to the archives, the expedition camp once stood. The surface around it was perfectly smooth, as if mountains had melted and the sand had flowed before freezing in an instant. We were about to leave. Scanners showed nothing, no radiation, no emissions, no signs of life. But when I picked up the crystal, the device in my hand jolted as if it had caught a heartbeat. A pulse. At first I thought it was a glitch, but then I noticed the crystal glowing faintly, steady and calm, like breathing. No one believed me, of course. They laughed, said I'd overheated under 3 suns. But I just stood there watching, and the longer I held it, the more I felt it wasn't just a mineral. It was like it recognized me. I can't explain why I felt afraid then. It wasn't the usual kind of fear you feel when facing danger. It was something older, deeper, instinctive. Like I'd touched something that existed long before life itself. Inside the crystal, tiny flashes moved, like lights flickering deep underwater. For a moment, I felt something like recognition, as if someone was looking back at me from within, and yet, despite the fear, I couldn't let it go. When I placed the crystal into the container, the sensors detected a faint electromagnetic field that matched a human biosignature. The commander brushed it off, said it was just static interference. But I saw his hand tremble when he tried to touch it himself. We returned to the ship with dozens of samples, but only one kept glowing even after we cut the power. That night, when everyone else was asleep, I picked it up again. I thought I saw something move inside. Not physically, but like a thought, a shadow of an emotion. Warmth spread through my fingers, and then a single word flashed in my mind. Not human, not spoken, more like a feeling that said, "Remember." I don't know where that came from, but I knew then that what I was holding was alive. Maybe not in the way we understand life, but alive nonetheless. It breathed, it slept. It waited, and I couldn't shake the thought that it wasn't just an artifact. It was a remnant, a trace of something that had once been human or godlike. When we left orbit, the navigation system malfunctioned. All the data started to distort, as if something was interfering with the computers. That's when I noticed a strange pattern on the display. It matched the shape of the crystal's energy field. I realized it had linked itself to the ship's systems, as if it wanted to help or take control. I tried to isolate the container, but the signals kept coming. Each day, I felt it more clearly. This wasn't just contact. It was communication, but on a level I couldn't comprehend. It was trying to tell a story. I saw images, ruins, glowing figures, a person in a suit dissolving into light, and a feeling of peace, a kind of peace I'd never known before. Sometimes, I think that whoever remained inside the crystal didn't die. Maybe they became a bridge like the legends say about those who connect matter and energy. Maybe they found a way to exist between forms, not a god, not a human, just memory, pure awareness. And if that's true, then they're watching. Watching us repeat the same mistakes their kind once made. Maybe they're waiting for us to realize that chasing immortality is just running from ourselves. Sometimes the crystal glows brighter when we pass through radiation fields. In those moments, it feels like it's smiling or warning us. We left the planet behind, but I know it isn't dead. It's just asleep. And someday, when humanity starts digging into the past again, someone like me, some curious fool, will pick up something strange from that lifeless plane, and then they'll wake up again. Not as enemies, not as gods, but as those who've been waiting for us to finally understand them. More and more, I think they never disappeared. They just went somewhere beyond time. And the crystal, that's their beacon. The light inside it, a lasting reminder that someday we'll reach them. Not through war, not through death, but through understanding.